Hello y'all, it's Nicole Zellick from Super Dive, and I'm here to give you some help on your NAUI teaching presentations. And it's a rite of passage that every instructor candidate must go through. But if you listen to this presentation and you take notes and you do everything just as I say, you will pass with flying colors and you will get 5s on every single presentation. So keep listening. By the end of this lesson, you'll have the knowledge to begin your instructor classroom presentations. You have to do 4 passing ones to become a NAUI instructor. You will also understand the rubric and be able to aim for a 5 consistently on your presentations. Alright, so here's our outline. First, we're going to get into talking about the teaching presentation rubric. So you can actually download that PDF. I recommend that you do, and that you start taking notes on it, and that you start using it as a checklist. We, the evaluators, are going to be using this when we're listening to your presentations, and we're going to score you based on your performance. Now, remember, this is to be used as a guide only, because when you're actually an instructor, there's not going to be someone in your classroom sitting and doing this checklist. No, this is just to remind you of good education principles so that you can consistently knock it out of the park when you are planning lessons in the future in your career. And remember, it can be used across different teaching media. We're actually going to get into that next. It is the 21st century, and we are no longer restricted to just the traditional classroom. Okay, but we are going to talk about that first. So here's a picture of a classroom. It's not inside an actual classroom. This is actually at the side of a pool. We've also taught at picnic tables, but usually there is a live audience. It's an in-person experience, and there's usually a blackboard or whiteboard or dry erase board to take notes. But really the trick is to get comfortable talking in front of people and to make it an engaging environment, you know, to pass around examples and to really engage everybody. Next we're going to talk about the live stream format. I think this one's going to become a lot more popular, and it takes some practice to get it right because it's live, right? So you have to have all your information live. You have to be careful not to make any mistakes, and an extra skill that this one requires is the ability to talk just to your camera, but there's also people watching at home in their homes, on their monitors, on their phones or their screens, and you're going to have to balance a conversation with them, acknowledging them, while staying on topic and teaching your presentation. It's not that easy, and you have to avoid getting interrupted, but really folks love when you engage with them. So pick your moments, and remember, it's live, so you got one take. The scariest part of this is all the technical difficulties it comes with. I always have technical issues live, and I'm like, oh guys, just wait. But it's okay. With some practice, you'll get good at this. The next one we're going to talk about is pre-recorded video, which is exactly what this is right here. I recorded this, and usually I do a lot more takes. I'm trying to keep this to one take and treat it like a live stream, but we'll talk about the benefits of pre-recorded video. You're going to see a lot more of this, especially on platforms like YouTube and TikTok. And you can make as many mistakes as you want because you can edit it out later. The downside is that you do need to have some knowledge of a video editor, such as Wondershare Filmora, Adobe. It's really up to you on how much you really want to edit that video. You can go the full 9 yards, or however many yards it is, I don't know. and, do sound effects and cool animated words that pop up, or you can just be simple. So it's really up to you. Also, I do like to talk about casual conversation because as an instructor, you should be able to do a teaching presentation on the spot. And whether a customer comes into your dive shop and is asking you about gear, and they're like, oh, like what should I look for in a mask? Your instructor brain should switch on, and you should be like, hello, customer. Here are the things that you should look for in a mask. And then, a proper, engaging lecture. Maybe lecture is a little bit formal, but the idea is that even when you're having a conversation, you should be communicating effectively and making sure that somebody's learning from you. Technology is advancing. Who knows what type of media we'll have in the future? I look forward to it. So let's talk about creating your presentation next. All right. So the first step is research. Do your research. Even if it's something that you know a lot about, you really want to do a few searches. Make sure that you have good research habits. You don't want to just type into the search bar and, fall victim to confirmation bias and just whatever you search, that's what you get. You really want to learn about good resources such as scholarly articles. Just be a good online researcher. That's a whole lesson in itself. I'm not going to teach it now, but just don't be a bad online researcher. Now let's talk about multiple drafts. Yes, you're going to have to do multiple drafts. And don't marry your first one. I learned this the hard way. I always come up with something the first time, and I really, really like it. And then by the time I'm done editing it, it usually does not look that much like the first one. And if it does look like the first one, you could have done a little bit more work. Expect to write multiple drafts of your presentation. So get it out there fast, like brainstorm, write it out, and then your second time over, that's when you want to start polishing and refining it. For me, that's the best way to work, and I'd recommend it. Now, this part is so important. Grab your rubric. Actually take it, look at your presentation, and then place a check mark next to every single piece. That is the only way that you can get a guaranteed 5 on every single presentation. I know this picture has just one check mark. You would really want to do a check mark every time that you accomplish one of the things on the list, because it's so easy to leave one out. Just don't do it. And don't just think about the rubric. Take the actual physical rubric and a highlighter or a pencil. Check it off one by one. Next, practice. All right? Don't expect to get something right on your first take. Practice talking in front of a mirror. I sometimes get a little camera shy, and so if you've never talked in front of a camera before, you might get, what do they call it? Red light anxiety, or something like that. When the recording light goes on, all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I get that sometimes. But the trick is just practice. Get used to standing in front of an audience, in front of a camera, and practice. And last but not least, execute. When you are in front of your audience, you have to be confident. If a student asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, tell them, oh, hey, I'll check with you. Don't ever pretend that you know something that you don't know. And on the flip side of that, try to gravitate towards the things that you do know. We're going to actually go to the physical rubric now, and we're going to break it down piece by piece. So let's talk about the introduction section. All right. So there's an attention gaining step. So whatever your attention gaining step is, whether it's a picture that tells a story, whether it's an anecdote about, hey, this one time I went diving and this crazy thing happened because I didn't know XYZ, that's an attention gaining step. My favorite attention gaining steps involve the audience. You'll get all storytelling, be like, imagine that you're diving and all of a sudden you run out of air, whatever. But you want to involve your audience. Humor is good, but not too much. Don't detract from your presentation. You want to establish the value of the presentation. This step is best done by outright saying, the value of this presentation is. When you go on in your life and you are in your instructor career, you should always have this step. Feel free to switch it around and say things like, the reason we are learning this is this information helps us to, but for the purposes of these teaching presentations, when there's an evaluator in the room and listening for specific clues, say the words, the value of this presentation is. The second that the evaluator hears those words, they're like, check mark, and then they give you the points. That's how you kind of cheat this system. Let's talk about presenting measurable objectives. Okay, so we did this at the beginning of this lesson. We talked about, by the end of this lesson, you will, and then you do bullet points. They're measurable. You don't want to just say, understand the rubric really well, because really well is not measurable. Understand the rubric and be able to aim for a 5, that's getting more specific, so we like that better. You want to use the words, by the end of this lesson you will, and you'll get a 5. And outlining the main points. So this is kind of like the logical progression of your presentation and the main points. We'll talk about the body next. Talking about logical progression, you don't want your presentation to look like that confusing mystery board, right? Your students aren't going to follow you all over the place. They want to hear an introduction, a body, and a summary. Keep your lesson relevant. Don't talk about the history of scuba diving. Stay relevant to your topic. Your information must be safe and correct. And if you provide information that is not safe or is incorrect, you will immediately fail the presentation. We're going to talk about effective training aids. And training aids are required in your presentation in order to pass it, but they're also the most fun. So a training aid is anything that helps your students learn, and that can mean a video that helps them visualize some information. I really like hands-on activities, such as the buoyancy challenge, where I give a bunch of summer camp students the challenge of making a starburst float and another starburst sink. And then they start thinking like, oh, how do I do this? So that's the kind of training aid that I would use if I were trying to explain concepts around buoyancy. Anything really, I like soda bottles is a great for any dive instructor. You can also spend a little bit of money and get a vacuum pump. I don't know what the right word for that is. Sorry. Darn, my terminology. Balloons, vacuum pumps, soda bottles, sponges. Those are great for in-person activities. If you are online and doing a live stream or a pre-recorded workshop, videos might be better than actually holding something physically. Head over to YouTube, look up a video, or shoot a video yourself. That's the best. And if you use other people's videos, make sure you credit them properly. You just want to make sure that you're involving your students and commanding attention. And so here are some great words: hands-on, interactive, fun, visual, engagement, and you really have to command attention. One way to do that is to keep your attention out on your students. It's very easy to be self-conscious and only think about the presentation and, oh no, what am I going to say next? No, you really want to put your attention out on your student and observe them. Did that thing that you just explained, did that land with them, or do they look like they're puzzled? And if they look like they're puzzled, tell them, it seems like you're puzzled. Anything that will get them to speak up, The last thing you want to see is somebody nodding off in your class. Yeah, the way to prevent that is just keep them involved. Games, fun visuals, and also your tone of voice is really important. If you talk in a slow, monotonous voice, everyone will fall asleep. Yeah. So don't do that. The next concept we're going to talk about is timeliness. And you might wonder, how come Nicole is so strict about timeliness during these presentations? How come the presentation can't be 10 minutes and 5 seconds? And how come she fails me when I go over exactly 10 minutes? That's because this is an exercise to make sure that you can stay on time and be conscious of training effectively, right? So when you're an instructor, sometimes these facilities like classrooms and pools, sometimes you might have to rent them out, or sometimes your workshop it has to fit into a particular schedule. You can't go over, and you don't really want to go under either. So part of it is to set a clock off to the side and be cognizant of the time and practice your presentation beforehand. And if you have to speed something up, speed it up in order to be timely. So timeliness is a skill. Enthusiasm, that one speaks for itself. People love passionate instructors, and if you're not passionate, your students can tell, and maybe you should find a different job. One that you're passionate about, because enthusiasm is contagious, and it also supercharges your learning. All right, we're going to talk about continuing education, and I do this in a variety of ways in my presentations. One example, I like to put helpful resources at the end of my presentations, and that's free continuing education. That helps out the student. And also remember, you can use your teaching presentations as a way to market yourself and your other courses. So I'm a huge fan of QR codes. One of my instructor friends calls me the QR queen. It might one day be an obscure technology, but for now, these QR codes are really helpful and fun. And for example, this is a lead capture code. If you take your phone and you point at the QR code, it'll actually send me a text that you're interested in some course, and it'll have like a discount code. Let's say that you are mentioning dry suits maybe in your presentation, but they're not relevant right now. But if any of your students is interested in taking a dry suit course with you next month, they can just scan this code and they'll have a discount. And one of the reasons that this is so effective is that it's instantaneous, and the second that they do it, you have a record on your phone that there's somebody who's interested and a way to talk to them. So it minimizes distraction from this presentation and also just helps you get more business in the future. And the limited time discount, I mean, that's a great way to, get people to just do it now. Strike the iron while it's hot, or some kind of, not very good at those. Oh no! The next part is terminology is correct, and my scuba terminology is really good, but apparently my metaphors and sayings and colloquialisms, they're not great. Your terminology should always be correct, because otherwise you will come across as an amateur. And here are my 3 biggest no-no words. And if I hear somebody say this in my class, if it's a student, they get to live. If it's an instructor, it's off to the chopping block. They're not flippers, they're fins. They're not goggles, it's a mask. And it's not oxygen in your tank, usually, unless you're tech diving. It's air, usually. So, yeah, no excuse for instructors to get those wrong. Right. We're going to talk about innovation next. And innovation, I'm not going to tell you how to innovate in your presentation. Innovation is kind of like the secret sauce or the magic recipe, and your evaluator will know it when they see it. It's pretty hard to get the innovation point, but this one, just try. Just go the extra mile, be creative. You've probably seen in this presentation, I love innovating. It's super fun. You've seen a screenshot of my Facebook Live trivia with emoticons. You've seen examples of my QR codes. Those are all things that we innovated here at SuperDive. And when I see a student that starts thinking like that, oof, it is beautiful. It is a sight to see. Please, we want new talent to bring all the innovation into this industry. And the last one, polish and professionalism. This is discretionary, of course. Spelling mistakes, big no-no. Don't want to see them ever. Cursing, also not professional. I used to get in trouble for it during my instructor training. But don't curse. Being professional, I make lots of jokes here and there, but at the end of the day, it has to be a solid presentation. It has to be buttoned up. Here's the summary of your presentation. All right, you're going to review the main points. Okay, so we talked about the teaching presentation rubric, which is that PDF you're going to use. We talked about how you might teach across various media, such as live streaming or classroom presentations. We talked about the process you're going to use while you're creating your presentation. And then we went through the actual rubric and we talked about how to achieve all the points in the introduction. We talked about achieving all the points in the body and the summary. And I'm going to emphasize the key points on the next slide. It's such a big emphasis that it's a slide on its own. Here is my Dive Instructor sandwich. Every teaching presentation boils down to 3 parts: the intro, the body, and the summary. And it's pretty simple. You're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them. And then you're going to remind them what you told them. It's simple as that, really. And it's a great visual. So there, my teaching sandwich. And last but not least, you're going to test the learning objectives. So at this point, you should have the knowledge to begin your instructor classroom presentations, and you should understand the rubric and be able to aim for a 5 on your presentations. In a regular presentation, I would test and actually interact with students and go back and forth and see if they've retained all the information. In this example right here, you, after watching this, have some presentations to do of your own. So that's the ultimate test. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Some action steps. This is just a Nicoleism. I like to do action steps at the end of each presentation. So take action. You will have to have a passing grade on at least 4 teaching presentations, and use the rubric to create your first teaching presentation. And in this specific class, it's going to be in a pre-recorded video format. Okay, so do as many takes as you need and then edit it, and let's get comfortable using pre-recorded video. Some helpful resources is the NAUI Rubric, which you can download. Access to your mentors, so that's me, and and some others. Comment, message us. You can actually comment right down here, and we will respond to your questions. And there's also a helpful do's and don'ts worksheet, which is also attached, which has some helpful things such as don't use full sentences as bullet points, and make sure to credit people properly when using their media, how to use Creative Commons, Alright, let's discuss. If you need some advice, type your questions in the comments, and I'm ready to see what you guys come up with. Thanks again. I hope that was helpful. I love teaching presentations, and I'm so excited to see what you come up with.